welcome everyone for a very special episode of the Group Up podcast. We are here for
No
what I'm
debates
calling
today.
the
We
Great
figured-
Dev Interview. No debates today. We figured it would be a bit more peaceful today. And yeah, it's going to be very exciting because as many of you know, there's been a blog recently dropped by game director Alec Keller talking about 6v6 and the hot button issue and talking about the history of Overwatch.
Chat,
And we thought,
6v6
talk
or
about that
5v5. What do you guys
than
prefer?
the man himself. So we've got some friends. Let me introduce my panel. First, co-hosting with me is Flats. Flats, what's up?
Hello.
How you doing? You excited about this one?
Oh yeah, I'm actually, you were the one who put our questions together, and I can't believe you're having me lead off with this one. I can't wait.
Yeah. So we're gonna get interesting. We're gonna be discussing. Actually, first, let me continue to introduce. In the top left, we have with the lovely Juno background. Unfortunately, in this overlay, Juno's head has been cut off on my side. But
Oh dear.
we have lead hero designer Alec Dawson. Alec, how you doing?
Hey everybody, excited to be here today. I've watched basically every podcast since Overwatch 2 came out, so I'll be excited to be on here for the first time.
Thank you. Well, I apologize for anything you had to hear.
12 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. Apologize for the time length and whatever you had to hear about us criticizing
Oh,
your work.
shit.
But hey, appreciate you coming through anyways.
I was on a few of those
And
podcasts.
in
I
the
feel so
bottom
sorry
left,
for him
as I
listening to me.
said, the man himself here to discuss his blog and many other big picture questions. Aaron Keller, game director of Overwatch. Aaron, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. I'm a little bit nervous, like I've seen this. I haven't watched every one of these. Not like Alec, but I've seen a decent amount of them. And what's funny is the one that I think I remember the most was a year ago, and it was the Great 6v6.
What the hell are
debate.
you eating?
Like,
I'm eating
that
seaweed.
I think that was a whole year ago, like this month. So it's like only fitting, right, that we come back here and kind of like continue it. Maybe next August we do it again.
Sure, I'd be very down to hear from you guys frequently, and we hopefully don't need to yell for 4 hours before we hear your thoughts. So, all right, I'm excited. So just to
Is it
set
good?
expectations
Yeah,
for all
chat.
those
Seaweed's
listening and
edible.
watching,
Hello?
we're going to be talking about a lot of things. We're going to start with some big picture questions, as Flats alluded to. We've got some, what I hope you guys will appreciate as potentially spicy questions. I hope the devs will see as informative questions.
So,
Then we're gonna
chat,
talk about
we
format
can't
stuff,
ask. I can
what
ask
the
you
changes
guys
the devs are
questions,
willing
but
to make,
these guys
tank
already have
stuff.
questions that they
Then we'll talk,
basically already
obviously 6v6. That's the issue
thought
that's
of
been
and
most,
written down to ask
frequently
them.
discussed recently.
So,
And then we'll round it off with some final questions about like open queue and other little questions that Flats and I had. So, Flats, I'd like you to kick us off. As you already said, we've kind of got a rough running order, and I think this will be a good and productive one to start with. Go ahead, take over.
Sure. Man, we're gonna start hard and heavy here, I guess. But I think it's kind of the elephant in the room, and I've really wanted to talk about it for a long time. And Overwatch does not have the best reputation among the greater gaming community. Obviously there's the whole Steam thing and whatnot, and just post Overwatch 2 and all that kind of, or post PV Overwatch 2, all that stuff. So what would you do? What do you want to do to maybe move past that and maybe begin to repair the lost trust within the game and the community?
ooh,
Here we go. This is like, I see how this is gonna go now.
No fluff questions here. No fluff questions here.
Yeah, exactly. This is a great question. I guess I would start by agreeing with you. So there is I think that there is a reputation that we have.
Their
at least, like,
reputation
I
ain't
think
good,
maybe
chat.
in the broader gaming space, and I don't want to push back on that. I don't think I want to. I don't need to go back too much into the history. Like I obviously have a history. Like I have a habit of doing that myself. If you've read the blog piece, right? But I think that the community has some valid things that they can point at for Overwatch, and for Overwatch 2. And so I think that it is much easier to lose trust than to build trust, right?
True.
And we've had a saying that we used to talk about it. I think a little bit more on the Overwatch team is you're only as good as your last release, and so you could be just like, just knocking it out of the park, patch after patch after patch, and if you get a bad one, people don't give you a whole lot of credit for it, you know. And I'm obviously not our reputation just isn't just based off of, you know, good or bad patches, but like I think to move forward here,
Gonna be a lot of
it
talking here.
requires us to have like a pretty solid vision for what the game ought to be going forward, you know. And I think we talked about it a little bit at BlizzCon, and I think we can talk about it a little bit more today, you know, like what the vision of the game is going forward. And it's us like really pursuing that, but then at the same time like having as much consistent and transparent communication with our community as we can. So I think that for us, it's a more of a long-term strategy of continue to make the game that like that.
When you've
vision of
done
the
something
game
right,
for
people won't
Overwatch,
think that you've done anything at all. It's a great
better,
quote that means,
you know, and
that makes me think of.
continually grow it and make it, you know, more of that game that all of our players want to play, and then getting in front of our players like we're doing today, like we've done in a lot of our blog pieces, and just talking about it.
Yeah, it's about following through, you know, say what we're doing, actually actioning on that.
I do
think
like
Aaron
their
talked
communication
about it a
lately,
little
chat.
bit, but being more clear about the game we're making, and then seeing
Lately,
that
their
being
communication has been
realized
really
within the
good,
game
though.
itself with the release of features, and you know how we go about balance as well, and then finally surprising our players with things that they don't even expect. I think that's really important for us to take big swings later on in Overwatch to show you like where the vision's going in the next few years too.
What I really
think
like
a
what they're
lot
doing
of
lately
it
as
is,
well.
Currently, we look at the
Not
game.
to talk
and
over
we
him.
understand that players think there's, you know,
Is
there's
that
really
if they
great
did have
content
come out with a
coming
bad
you know.
patch, chat,
I'm so
lately
excited for
they've been
Juno,
coming out with
obviously, at the
other
back end,
patches
but
that
it
that
can't just
happen
be
right
the
away
cadence
that
of
try to
release,
fix
release,
what they messed
release,
up,
and
which is really
maps, and
good.
continue that for a number of years. Has to be some other stuff too.
What do you think? Like, either one of you, like, what would you do?
Flash, you go first.
Okay. I think Alex is 100% right. It can't be just hero every 4 or 5 months and maps every other season. Especially with like how competitive the gaming space is. Everyone's fighting for someone's attention. And even, you know, even if like
Farah, they were completely
personally you
clueless
might
on.
feel like if you felt Overwatch was in a good
I don't know why
place,
they didn't just
overall
nerf
like
Farah.
eventually people get bored of just the same thing over and over
Yeah.
and over, and something new to spark their attention really does bring like life back to it. I look to like Fortnite when they did like their revamp of like going back on like, you know, the original
That's what I
release.
said that a
and
long
yeah,
time,
they
and that's
prey
what
on
they should
nostalgia
do.
with that and that kind of stuff, but like that
What's up,
was a
BB?
big moment for them. It did bring a lot of players back. It did bring a lot of excitement back. And I'm not saying like Overwatch needs to do that, although I'm
They
sure there's
should
tons of
do
people
that.
would want that. They would just something big enough to like move the needle, because even though like Overwatch has changed a lot in the past 2 years, in some ways like very much for the better, even though people, you know, may not know that, or they don't know the communications, or they don't know about the balance, or they don't know like how often this kind of stuff happens. They don't even want to come back and give it a chance, right? But
Yeah.
like if something big enough comes, then they might try it and they like, oh, like this actually could be good, and that
Like
could be something
6v6.
that's in the game, you know, some kind of major change, or you know, like we're going to talk about it here, 6v6. Like 6v6 is a giant format change. Like something like that is big enough to like, oh, like that could get people's attention, or even something out of the game where you're like, you know, people always talk about having a TV show, or like whatever happened to like the cinematics, you know, because like early Overwatch there were so many cinematics and it would just hit, and it just doesn't really feel like there's as much of that anymore. Honestly, if I had to choose, I would do both together at the same time, and you know, fighting for people's attention.
What's the
in
role
a
distribution of
live
66?
free-to-play
2
game
tanks,
is
2
really,
supports,
really
2
difficult.
DPS.
I'm very lucky to not have to do that job. But yeah, I think it's honestly a combination of a few things, but I mostly agree with Alec that it's just got to be something big.
You kind of have to do that job. It's just
I feel like they're
in
doing
a
this
different way.
interview because they have something
It's too
big
much credit.
planned, chat. I think it is.
I'll be very quick
the
and succinct.
66
I want
stuff.
to get to more of you guys' answers. I think I agree with the things you guys said. I think so. Just to summarize as well, what you guys said: more open
The
communication.
Flats is not asking for
like,
way too
paint
much.
a clear vision and then deliver on it.
6v6 was
and then
our thing
also
already
bring
in
some
the game.
surprises. So I
Plus,
think
a
all those
TV
things
show
are
is not asking for
really
too
good.
much.
I think
Or a
ultimately
series.
whatever
Fucking
player
League
we
of
bring in and
Legends
out,
does
they have to be
it.
satisfied with the game
I don't
they're
even
playing.
play
So I think
League, and I watch fucking
the
Arcane,
game
and
has
I'm
to
very
satisfy
excited
the
about
players.
season 2.
And then I would think, big picture, we need to make people fall in love with the Overwatch heroes again. Because I think it's a big, you know, open statement, but what drew people early was the like, oh my god, I love the Dragon Short, I love Genji, I love Hanzo, I love seeing what they're doing, I love Mercy. Obviously, it's very easy
You don't
for me
know
to sit
how
here
hard
and
it
say,
is to
yeah,
make
I want
produce a
that
TV series.
show, as Flats already mentioned. I want
Listen,
that
I'm gonna be
Netflix show.
honest
I
with
think
you.
I
If I
told
was
you guys
Blizzard
this
or if I was
directly as
Microsoft
well,
and I
that
had
think it's
billions
a
of
big
dollars,
thing, but what anything
I think it would be
that
pretty
you
easy
guys
to
can
just
do
be like,
make
hey, here's X amount of
players
money,
fall in love
do
with
your
Heroes
thing.
again. We know PvE is kind of not happening in the way it was going to happen, but I think we need to fall in love with Overwatch again. I think is the TLDR. Anything you guys want to add before we move to our next question, Alec and
Yeah.
Aaron?
I think we could probably start
Jason,
talking
Preacher
about
Master
just
Prime.
like the vision for Overwatch, you know? So
Yeah,
if, like,
actually,
we
that was
kind of
my
move into
next
that
question.
as a,
Actually, yes, that's perfect. Because I'll just set up the question, which is that we're about 8 years in now, right? This is about to be the 8th year of Overwatch, and I think I look to the other
Just come out
games
with
that
a
have been
fucking Mercy skin
out
or a
for this
Kiri
long,
skin.
like
Pays
League
for
of
itself.
Legends, like Dota, Counter Strike. It feels like they have a pretty clear definition of like this is what the game is. Like this is what you sign up for when you play. I personally I find that changes a lot with Overwatch. It has changed a lot, as you kind of alluded to in your blog, Aaron. Like the format changed so much. We went from like 6 Winstons to now we're 5v5 and 1 tank, 2-2. What to you guys is the core identity of Overwatch? Like, what does it boil down to when you strip everything else away? What will it always be achieved or aim to be? And yeah, I imagine you'll say that it's changed a lot, but if so, where do you think it lands now?
yeah, this is a big one, right?
Oh.
This is like, we could talk about this one for a long time. Like, in short, I think, Overwatch, like what we want it to be is just the best team-based, competitive, hero-based arena
Sorry, I closed
shooter that we
Overwatch,
can
that's why I
make
did
it,
that.
right? PvP arena shooter that we can make it. And I think that there's a competitive nature to our game that's integral to the enjoyment of it. And you're right, it has changed over time. Like, it was the game when it first launched, like it had no hero limits, right? For months. I think it was November of 2016 before that was finally included in quick play, right? So it's like there was a part of like the original like essence or the original soul of what Overwatch was that was a little bit crazier, a lot crazier
I
than
finished
what
my
it is
seaweed, I'm
right
sad.
now, and we have a design value at Blizzard, which is like the right decisions change over time, and you can kind of look back at the history of Overwatch, I think, and see where like I don't really know if it would have been the right thing to do to ship Overwatch with role queue, let's say, but like you can see why it became the right decision for the game. And so I think that we are in a place right now where the game, the player base that we have, it's a fairly competitive player base. They're pretty invested in the game. And I think that the direction that we go in the future is to serve like this set of players and to continually improve upon the game experience that we have right now. You talked about some of the other games that have come out, in the meantime, right? And there's games that have come out, and then there's competitive games that have been out for a long time. I think that have some things maybe that Overwatch is missing a bit. And one of those
I think they're
things
talking about Marvel
is,
Rivals, chat.
either like we talk about this internally a lot, either like a greater strategic depth, or player agency. And when you look at it, there is a lot of strategic depth to Overwatch, but a lot of that is like putting together your team composition. Once you get into the match, it really is like executing, right? And there's not, besides like swapping to another hero, there's not like a ton of other choices to make. And like you have a lot of other games where there might be other choices to make inside of that. That was part of what the pickable passives, quick play hacks was trying to get at. Are there other systems that we could potentially put into this game that give players more agency, or that start giving the game a little bit more strategic depth to it? Overwatch also, it is incredibly fast paced. There's a lot going on. So it's like, I think we can only do a certain amount of that at any one time before people start getting overloaded. But we're starting to look at that. And so it kind of gets into like, as we talk about the future for Overwatch, we think that that we always ought to be working on at least like one big bet for this game. And there are some, I think, some really exciting things that are happening right now internally, so it's like I guess like I agree with you of like what is that magic, how do you introduce people to this magic of Overwatch? I think we have some ideas on some things that we could release to do that. And so for us, like, I know this is kind of going long, sorry, but you start looking at like what are the things we can do to the core game to start either improving it from a competitive standpoint or doing
Hello,
things like
Jay.
adding
Yo,
strategic
nightmare. How
depth or
you
player
doing?
agency to it, in or out of the game. That could also be something like a map voting system.
Seasonal
And then what are
team
the,
buffs
like,
would
the
be actually
really
that's
big
what something
bets
that
that we can make
Marvel Rivals
on
does. That's
Overwatch
actually
as
that
well
makes
to,
every
like,
season
kinda
feel
like
different. That's actually
really,
pretty interesting.
kinda
Maybe
like
different
expose
passives
Overwatch
every other season. Chat, I mean every
outside
season,
of like
but that
our
means they need to get more
community, this like
passives.
very invested hardcore community. There's a much bigger gaming community outside of that, and there's a lot of opportunities to, I think, reintroduce Overwatch,
Darren,
the
Preacher Man's a
PvP
prime
shooter,
sub.
to that community.
Yeah, I think if even when you look at conversations on the team within probably the last 6 months where the focus has shifted, it's been much more. You can kind of like almost see these words on the wall, like we're a social competitive game, and that starts to lead some of the things we're talking about in more seriousness than maybe we did previously. I think there's a lot more serious conversations around bans, more serious conversations around tournaments, more serious conversations around map voting. I think a lot of that might have been a little like, oh, that would be nice in the past, but I think now those are things that are top of mind that we want to actually try to build towards eventually, And I think even looking at the social part of that, I think one of our goals right now as a game is to restore the social fabric within the game. I think that's been something that we recognize has been lost over time. And, games come out at different times. I think even the way people communicate has changed, right? Just look at how many people are in Discord now compared to, when Overwatch first launched and how people communicate through that versus like in-game chat, right? But there are things we need to do to make it feel more like a social experience than it previously did as well.
If they wanted
So I
to
think
make
those
it
are some
feel
of the
like a
things that
social
just come into
experience,
focus a lot
chat,
more,
why did
and
they
you'll
take
see
out
some of the resources go.
LFG?
Yeah, and I think like it might be
Why did they
interesting
take
to
out the
talk
looking for
a bit,
group
and, like,
feature?
interrupt
A
at
lot of
any
people
time
used
if
it
you
and they
wanna,
just
like,
took it
move on.
away.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead,
No,
finish
you're
your
good.
thought.
What
I'm
happened to the
loving this.
Overwatch guild
Okay.
system
Yeah,
that they were
we'll
talking
move
about
on once
years
we're done.
It's
ago?
probably good to even define what competitive means, because like that
What
is a
happened to all
term
that?
that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? And I think even in gaming,
What
there's
happened to?
probably a
I know this is
spectrum
totally
of
irrelevant, but what happened to
competitive games out
inspecting
there,
your
and
weapons that
it's
they were
like,
talking about? And they
you put, like, a
advertised when
game, let's
Overwatch
say,
2
like
was getting
Counter-Strike or
released.
something like that. That's kind of like pegged pretty
Like
far
even
to the end
fucking
of that
Marvel Rival.
spectrum.
Chat, I know I talk about this
In
game a lot,
how
but
competitive
Marvel
it is.
Rivals
And like there's multiplayer games out there where I guess you compete
has that in their
against each
game,
other,
and they have
but
a
they're
tournament
really
fucking
just
tab
about
built in
the
their
fun
game.
rather than the competition. Like you're gonna go play Mario Party or something like that. Like it's kind of hard to call that a competitive game, even though you're competing. And so there is like this spectrum that you kind of that. I think it's important to kind of like know where you exist on that and kind of like how do you place yourself. And I think we are. I don't think Overwatch itself is the game that we are trying to peg all the way on one side of that. Like, and if you're saying like, let's say the right side of that graph is the most competitive you can get, and the left side's the least, we are closer to the right. I don't think we're in the middle or anything like that. So it's like
Love
we treat our
Diva.
game
Appreciate
as a
massive new tier 1
competitive
sub.
experience. And we want people to have that sort of like that spirit and like that seriousness a lot of times when they play it. But it's not all the way over on the right side.
Blast, do you mind if this is the second? We're going to start going ad hoc now, I think. I think we have to like scrap some of our plan. 'Cause I did some
Yeah, I
interesting
was thinking
things
the
there
same thing.
that I want to dig into. If like, do you mind if I ask a quick follow up on that, and then you want to ask any follow ups?
You're good. You're good.
Because I like that you kind of define this idea of like we're a competitive social shooter. When you say competitive, what do you mean? Like, is it like people playing just comp? Is it pro play? Like, is it people only in top 500? Is it diamond? Like, where is comp, and whose experience is the competitive experience talking about?
So good, because there's the experience of playing a game, just like the actual release of the game, and then there's a there can be, for a lot of games, a different ecosystem around that game, like a competitive ecosystem around that game. And so I think a lot of times what we're talking about is just the actual game of Overwatch and not necessarily a lot of the other competition that's happening with it. And there is a range inside Overwatch as well. Like when you look at how serious people are in ranked and how serious they're going to be in quick play, it's different. It's going to be different for every person, that's playing. Like there's a lot of people that treat
6v6
quick play,
without open queue kills
as
the game.
their
That's not
main
true. 6v6
competitive
with roll
format
queue is
of
really fine.
Overwatch. And it is actually our most popular game mode. Like more people play quick play than play comp. But not everybody treats it that same way. And so like we have to recognize that we're not going to be able to
I feel like people like I
there's
feel
not
like
gonna be
quick
a
play is always going to be more
one-size-fits-all approach for this. And so I think that
it's
there
gonna
is
be
something
played
really
more
interesting about kind of having
than
this
comp,
range
because
of
comp is a commitment
competitiveness
that you have to
we
do
offer
for
people in the
20
game.
15 to 20
But
minutes.
also
Quick
we
play,
have
you
to be
jump in and you
cognizant
can
that,
get
like,
out right
people
away.
kind of play it
I
for
mean, not
different
really right
reasons.
away,
So
because if you
for
leave
us
the
at
game, you're going to
ranked,
get banned.
and like as you start getting into high levels of ranked, we treat that as an experience that we really need to protect the competitive integrity of it, and we put a lot of our efforts around balance even and hero design into like making sure that side of the game stays as competitive as we can make it. But then as we start looking at some other parts of it, yeah, we want people to be able to have serious games of Overwatch. It's just not going to be quite as serious as it is when you get into comp.
Sure. Alec, anything you want to add for
That was good.
Flat's follow up?
Go
Okay,
ahead.
awesome. Flats, go ahead. Anything you want to add to what was discussed?
Not really a ton. Just I personally think that quick play should be like way less of a comp system. I know most people play it, I know whatnot, but at least to me, as a mostly former competitive player at this point, I don't even play it that much anymore. I've always viewed as quick play as like the more fun, have a good time with friends, like play with like off rolls type of game mode. But it does feel like as Overwatch 2 has gone on, it's almost like ranked light. And I don't know if that totally is the vibe that should be going for it, because sometimes you just want to load up and like play your off roll or play something else, and it's like sometimes you feel like you kind of have to just lock in, right? Because like the game is so much harder. And maybe it's just me not misremembering, like Overwatch 1 leading into Overwatch 2 didn't totally feel as, I don't know, sweaty, I guess is a good word of maybe saying it. So that's at least how I feel about it, because I think the competitive side should always be competitive and like you said before, have that competitive integrity to it and really, be protected. Though I do think there are some things that could be done with it. Like, for example, top 500 doesn't really feel that competitive. I barely play ranked anymore, and I can, as long as I finish my 50 wins, I can easily hold it, and I don't even think I deserve it at the moment. Like, it's really not that difficult. And so there's probably some things maybe even on that side that could be looked at, but I think that's for another time.
We used to talk about like a third queue, like, hey, is there like ranked quick play and like the thing under quick play or the thing in between quick play and ranked? So like we used to have a lot of discussions around it, and maybe it's time to talk about those some more. Like some of the downsides to it is like the more queues we introduce, like the more it kind of splits up the player base.
Yeah, that's true, but that's why you should take out arcade.
Also,
no one plays arcade. I'm sorry, chat. If you want to play arcade games, just go to the custom game thing.
In any one of those, you're still going to get, because there's people in comp that treat it just as like the clown car version of a game where they're just doing whatever they want to, right? Mm-hmm. And so like you would still have people in every one of those treating it just as serious as they do. And so like when we used to talk about it, we never really acted on it because we thought it might just play out the same as what we've got right now, with people asking for a fourth queue after we introduce the third one.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Never thought about it that way.
Again, Alec, anything you want to add before we move to our next question?
Honestly, it's something like we have difference of opinion on the team at times, which is like how much should comp and quick play differ? I mean, I think when we talk about like feature systems, sometimes a lot of us are like, these should be comp only, like make sure these like more like crunchy systems are actually like only in comp. That's the experience you're opting in, so you can get like the lighter version of Overwatch and quick play. I personally think quick play has gotten too sweaty, and I think we should try to figure out ways to alleviate that over time, whether it be like even in some of the experiments we're doing in the future with how we want to look at like role queue and everything, or some other form of it. But it has gotten to the point where, you play a game of quick play, maybe flats, and you go in and people are counter swapping you. You're like, oh, this is not the quick play experience you remember, or really maybe.
Bro, counter swapping in quick play is kind of fucking weird. Yo, bro, chat, I don't understand the people who take quick play too fucking serious. It's quick play, bro. Relax. You want to go play comp, go play comp. You're not a good player if you're a silver player. Fucking counter switching and trying to win a quick play game.
Like,
listen,
the battle pass progress is like one argument I've heard since the start of Overwatch 2, people have said, well, I try so hard to quick play because I need to get certain things for my battle pass. So like that's another fast. So like you've kind of added these systems. So like how are they performing on your end? And if you feel like they're successful, but you don't want quick play to be as sweaty as it is, like how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think we were too stringent at the beginning of it. We pulled back a little bit on some of those penalties in quick play. But definitely was too harsh when those first went out. I think that's something we're still evaluating. I think we were just talking to Gavin and Morgan yesterday about what some next steps could be for that, and if they're in the right place currently. There's also, I do think though, there's an element in quick play that you're still playing to win in some way. I think there's a level of like how hard you're trying to win, but I think if someone is literally AFK in spawn, or they're not even trying to be with the team, I don't think that's the right way. That's not how we want quick play to evolve either, right? Yep. We do want to be a place where people are still playing, it's like you're playing pickup soccer with your friends. You're all trying to like have a good time, try to win. You may not like slide tackle each other and try to like go all out, but you're still trying to have a good time, set up plays and score goals, right? I think that's the same sort of thing we want. We still want the game of Overwatch to unfold, right?
Yeah, it's tough.
Awesome.
I mean, there's 11
yeah,
other
you
players
say
in
there
one of
should be
those
more
matches where
incentives
somebody leaves, and so
more
I
XP
think
in comp.
when people say, hey, this ought to be the more casual mode,
But I don't think
right.
Overwatch is the type of game that gives out free
but
incentives.
At the same time, like, you are playing a social game, you're playing it with other people, and like one of the things that we look at a lot is or we talk about internally is stomps in the game, and there can be a lot of different reasons for stomps, but they don't feel good when they happen to you. One of the factors is levers in a game, and so it's like, do we want to, like, how much freedom do you give somebody to affect another player's experience in the game? I don't think there's like a perfect answer here. It's probably going to be something that like us and every other like social, especially like competitive game, is always going to struggle with, but we are trying to find like that right balance of like, how do you give players freedom, but also how do you like try to restrict them from like harming another player's game experience?
Yeah, and there has been differences there when looking at stomps. Like the spawn system that we have in quick play is different than the one in competitive, and we're actually looking at that for season 12 and maybe some improvements there to see like how we can make that even better experience. Hopefully, less stomps in the game as well.
Nice, thank you. That's very illuminating, actually. Flats, you have anything you want to add?
Not on this part now.
Okay, cool. I want to actually skip forward a significant chunk, actually, if you're all right with it. I actually want to go into talking about tanks and stuff, because I think these guys have alluded to counter swapping. So do you mind if I?
Yeah, no, go ahead, go right ahead.
Right. So because Alec, you kind of mentioned really saliently there that like you're playing quick play and people are still like 5-man counter swapping you, and it's very frustrating. So I think that's partly where this 6v6 movement has come from, right? Like people have said like, look, tank feels maybe worse than ever to play. And it kind of feels like, and certainly the argument on the 6v6 side is that counter swapping is built into
maybe
the
a
one
third
tank
queue
format.
called
like
warm up between quick play and comp.
And that always will create misery. So is that
that's
how
called
you guys
practice
do you
range?
think that counter swapping will always be a thing in Overwatch 2? Or do you find like there's maybe some way we can alleviate it? And do you agree with the assessment that like people are like, this sucks, like this as a format, this sucks, people swapping me all the time?
Yeah, I think there's a few things here, right? First off, what we see, like actually how players behave, is so DPS damage players and tank players swap about the same rate, right? They usually swap, you see on average like 1 a match, and then support players are about half of that, so they swap a lot less. And I think the experience of tank, you're kind of the one being targeted in this, right? it's not just that the tank's swapping for you; it's also that the DPS swaps for you too. And I think everyone's talked about what are in some ranks where it might feel like Reaper, they get a Reaper swap into them. They're like, oh man, I have to deal with Reaper. That part can definitely be frustrating. I think there's ways we want to look at alleviating that. I think we want to look at some of those like more hard counters still, make those a little bit softer. That's something that's on our mind. But also I think it's important for us to kind of have a conversation about that is a core part of the game. It's a core mechanic of Overwatch, and they're actually not necessarily like counter swapping to skill, but understanding team composition and how those go against each other. That's a game knowledge check to some degree as you move up, right? Yeah, let's go, and we believe like that flexibility is really important in the game. We would never want to walk people, into hero roles, into a
See,
hero
that's why I said one tricking is not good for the game, chat. I'm sorry.
Overwatch is.
You should never be able to. You should never one trick.
But we've tried some things internally. We looked at like limited swaps. We looked at maybe you have to earn your swaps. We've definitely gone through some experiments. I think we're still chatting about that right now.
Wait, earn your swap. No, one tricking is a problem, chat. One tricking is definitely a problem.
Things that are at top of mind for the team, and like maybe some solutions that we might need to look at. Because we understand that it is a frustrating experience.
Like you guys are saying that it's not a problem, but if you're in a game and you care about your rank or you care about winning, and then you have a fucking Torb one trick, who's the hard counters, and the other team switches to Pharah, and then no one's killing the Pharah, and the Pharah's rolling your team, and you say, hey Torb, can you switch to Cassidy or a hit scan to kill the Pharah? And he's like, no, I'm gonna play Torb. You're probably gonna get mad. So don't say you're not gonna get mad. Yo, TSB for 18 months. I appreciate it, my friend.
It's really depending on like how much verticality is available to you. Do you have to change your play style? There's a lot of things you have you have tools at your disposal to deal with that. And we need to provide tanks with, more of those tools in certain situations as well.
I think
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go.
Okay.
We're here to talk. We're here to listen to you talk, so go ahead.
I think it's interesting too when you
one tricks are good at one character. What's wrong with that? Because metas change and characters get buffed, characters get nerfed, bro. Get with the times, old man.
Different parts of the community bring up
some characters in one meta in one season are not going to be good in the next.
Tank play in 6v6.
Possibly.
I think more than other parts of the community, and what we see is some of this is actually even region.
So they change and do worse.
So it's like,
or
you might
before being a one trick, you should go play other characters, so you're never a one trick, and you're good at a lot of characters instead of being great at one.
But like. Some of like the other regions, they have kind of a different take on it, and we get feedback sometimes, like let's say we're talking like to our Korean players where
Cyrus push past 73 months, my friend.
Damn, talking about this. Like
appreciate it.
Stop talking about 6v6 and just get on with 5v5 because that's what we want to do. So it's like there is like I think what we want to, like, one of the things we would like players to know is that we totally get the feedback. And like what Alec is saying is we do actually think that there's some things we can do to address it in the world of 5v5. But we're also trying to listen to like all of our players like worldwide at the same time.
Yeah, and it's something because as I said, it's more top of mind. So we're taking a closer look at it recently. And what we see is swapping in matches actually happens the most like in plat and diamond compared to other ranks, whether that be higher ranks are consolidating on the meta faster, or whether they're more one tricks in that area, and then bronze players just don't do it as much too. It's kind of like has this little parabola there.
Right, there's lots of really interesting things. Flats, anything you want to?
I do kind of want to lead into one of my questions then, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Because I feel like it's kind of relevant then. I know we're probably going to talk about a lot of 6v6 stuff in a little bit, but let's say we run the test for the 6v6 stuff and it doesn't do well, right? We decide not to go back to 6v6. I want to know, how does the team feel about the game current day, like right now where it is? Because personally, I feel like Overwatch is a great casual game. Like if you just play a couple hours, either a week or a couple hours a month, you probably think it's all right. But if once you start playing for a number of hours, you really start to see the flaws. And one of the big ones is with counter swapping. I personally agree and also disagree with the statement of like, it is a skill, because that is true. But the amount of value you get for just swapping a singular person, like the tank player, because they have so much value compact into them. And I feel like that's a lot of the argument around the 66 is like, once you put it on two people, it's a lot harder to, focus on one person, because that attention is spread out, that responsibility is spread out because you get so much value from it. But
Totally.
I just kind of want to know, like, what does the team think, and like if this also kind of almost comes back to the first question of the interview, is we don't decide to do it, how do you bring excitement back to the game? Because 6v6 is potentially a nice thing sitting on the table. If we decide to go forward with 5v5 we are today, how do you feel?
Yeah, you want to start?
Yeah, I could go ahead. I can start on that. And I think you're right that regardless of whether we would move forward or like
I don't know,
permanently
chat.
swap to a 6v6 format.
No, you have to
running
try
it would be
6v6
something
first.
that would be pretty exciting for the community. You know, like we totally we totally get that. But like I think it's also like,
nah, I think if you stick
there's,
with
like, a few
5v5,
things
I
maybe
think
to talk
that
about
I don't know.
in the question, because I might not agree with
Depends
like,
on what they do. I feel
all
like
of
what they're doing right
the
now,
setup there, like
they do need a big change,
like,
chat. I feel like
there's,
the
probably
community
a
is
pretty
dwindling.
broad set of like definitions of what a casual game is, you know. And so like, you know, I mentioned like Mario Party very early on, like that's a pretty casual game, you know. It's hard to put Overwatch in the same category as a game
Yo,
like
Egg!
that, you know.
Appreciate
So,
Massive 5, get the subs, my friend.
I'd probably push back on that a little bit. Like the kind of like the mastery curve of maybe like any one hero in our game is pretty long. And like the mastery curve of like getting to where you feel like you could be good at Overwatch is pretty huge also. It takes a pretty big time investment to get into this game. And it's actually something that we talk about sometimes as being a problem and like a big obstacle for new players getting into our game, because there's just so much you have to learn and be able to sort of like execute on. And then like I think the
Egg
other thing to
gifted
remember
5
is, like,
subs.
we've
First
got, like,
message of
millions
my stream is
players
Egg.
every
I
day
appreciate
logging
it,
in
Egg.
to Overwatch, and like when we look at our own like internal metrics on it, like the game, it feels like it's pretty sticky for a lot of these players. There's like a lot of people that feel like they're enjoying this game and continuing, you know, and like in like their like in their interaction of it. And so like I think that like from our point of view, it's like, yeah, I think like we acknowledge the feedback and that there's things to be doing with tanks. And I don't think it's just counter swapping. Like the thing we haven't talked about yet also is like the pressure put on that tank player as well, you know. So like I think that there's things to do there, especially in the world of 5v5. Like in the world where there's five players on each team, I think we've got levers that we can
I don't
pull.
know,
And
chat.
we also did talk about like potentially
you guys are
there
also saying
could
it
be
in
other
6v6
game
the
formats
metas lasted longer.
that
Wait, what was it?
work in 5v5 as well. Like maybe
In Overwatch
different
1, the
ways
metas
of
lasted
putting
so
a
stupid long.
team
Once in a while, we got a good
composition
balance.
together that are a little
That's
bit more of
because
like a
they
hybrid
took their
version
time away from Overwatch 1 to
of a
build
role
Overwatch
queue
2 and
system,
put their
you know?
attention to
So,
Overwatch 2.
and maybe, like,
Imagine,
I don't know if I had to get into this. Like maybe I'm going a little too far here, but like I know a lot of people talk about that.
imagine
like,
if they
the
actually
mythical,
gave
you
all
know,
this fucking
October
attention that they're
balance
doing
patch,
for a
right?
game right now because they're
Where it's like,
and
hey,
they put it towards
here's
Overwatch
where,
1.
like,
I think it would be a lot
like
better.
6v6 was in the very best state that it was, you know, to where it's like if you never had that
And what was this?
for Overwatch 1, would you still be
If the
would
game is
people still
hard
kind of be
to
in this-
learn,
in
make a
this
better
same
tutorial.
headspace? Is there a
True.
version of balance in Overwatch 2?
Is the tutorial that they
achieves
have
those
right now
same-
still
those,
Soldier
like, those
76?
same goals.
Yeah, I would second a lot of that. I think there's still like a really strong
Oh.
foundation. I think our content is
Spike,
getting
appreciate
better
us at 5
and
months.
better, actually. I think even if we look at like Juno's coming in season 12, I think our hero releases have gotten more defined in terms of what Overwatch 2 heroes are compared to what it may have been in the past. So very excited about that. I think there's Lifeweaver changes I'm excited about coming to the next patch. Things of that nature that we're looking at kits and being able to actually make them better. So I think there's constant improvement happening. You know, map reworks coming in season 13, right? So that we've spoken about as well. So I think evaluating all of that, I think there's really still a very strong foundation, but we need to make a lot of elements in the game more rewarding. Make sure that there's times you come back to play Overwatch because there's something going on that's very special, and I think there's a few of those like coming up. But also making sure like there's offerings for every type of player. I think right now there's a very core experience, but we need to make sure we put a little effort into things maybe above, like even more competitive than that core experience or less competitive than that core experience, right? Because those two are very similar, comp and quick play to some degree. So I think there's still a very we're working with a really good base here. Overwatch is still, I think an amazing game, but there's work to do for sure. And I think as long as we continue to improve it, I think we can end up in a good place.
Can I ask you a question just on like what you said?
Yeah.
You said like the content is like, like is improved. I'm curious on like what aspect you mean. Just because
the content has improved.
We had a podcast recently. We talked about it, and like even at the beginning of this, we talked a little bit about like, there's got to be something more to that cadence. What things would you say like are you guys most proud of those additions, or like what do you think are the ones that move the needle the most?
Well, I think there's been a lot of learnings. Even if you look at some of, like a clear example to me is this is smaller in terms of the needle, right? But let me just go for it. Like if you look at Runasapi coming out, where it's like that takes a lot of learnings from Push and the first few maps of Push, and then I think it's the best design map for Push, right? And that's because we've learned things from when we released the mode. And I think you look at Heroes, you look at Juno, and we look at sort of, some of the polish that's gone into there. There's a lot of people on the team, including myself, that haven't been around for a very long time, right? And I think all of these people
that's because they cut like 1,000 people from their workplace.
We're making better stuff and we're making it faster. So that part of it was like seeing how the team works together on the day-to-day.
Or even more. I think even more
focused and getting better at our jobs. I think that's helped a lot with some of the content we've released.
I think that there's a bit more there too. So like the say what you want to say about the competitive system that launched with Overwatch 2. But I think that like season 9 was like a really big step forward for the ranked system in the game. I also think that like when you start looking at a lot of the events that we used to run compared to some of the ones that we're getting into now. So something like Mirror Watch, something like the latest quick play hacked with pickable passives, even things like the April Fool's events that we run. We feel like there's really something about kind of like changing the way that our heroes play on a core fundamental level that our players like that really resonates with the player base. And so I think that like when we start talking about like content coming forward, whether it's for events or things for the core game, I think that we start looking at the response that we've gotten from players to events like that. Like Alec said, I think that there's like a lot of learnings that we've had, and it's taken us a little while to get to this point where we're like, oh hey, here's what it feels like our players like really want to play these types of events, get the most people playing in them, playing the most hours for the longest period of time. And so we think that like, and you'll see it in upcoming events that we're going to be doing, in upcoming seasons through the rest of this year and next year. I think you're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, I think like April Fool's is one of these moments. April Fool's, the 2023, right? Last year's one, where we're like, oh, this is really resonating, and that was sort of where we started to sort of shift a little bit about, and now we're at this place of like, okay, these are the types of events we want to build, and it just makes everything more focused, and we feel like it hits better with the community as well.
Yeah,
in terms of these PvP things. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, it's not just events. It's like, how do we start pulling this stuff into the game?
Yeah, kind of everywhere, but that's like a isolated example of something.
Yeah.
Right?
Nice. Flats, here's what I'm thinking we do, because we've got about 15 minutes of their time left. I have one.
Oh, I didn't even know. They only have an hour.
No, I think we have longer.
We're supposed to have an hour, right?
Hour and a half.
Or do you guys have more? Hour and a half? Oh,
yeah.
We have more? Okay, well, that's great. If you have more of your time, then we don't have to kind of rush through. But in that case, I have a follow-up on this department, Flats, and then we can maybe start moving over towards like 6v6 kind of stuff, because I know that the 6v6 people will be very unhappy with us if we have this time with you guys and we don't kind of interrogate a little bit. But
stop releasing DPS heroes as support just to fill.
I'm just kind of curious. You mentioned, Alec, you were like, okay, map vetoes are on the line, hero bans are on the line. Like, how big? And even Aaron mentioned as well that you're looking at like just big changes, like something that might even change up the format, the open queue. Mm-hmm. How big are we talking? Like, how big is the window where you could go? Like, what can we see? Are we going to see like items, like a MOBA item system? Are we going to see like some sort of talent system? That's what the pickable passives alludes to. Like, how big is the table when it comes to you guys talking about it, and how serious are those discussions of like, yeah, we could actually go down this route of adding items to Overwatch, for example?
Yeah, I mean, we have conversations about these things. We have been testing some of these things, but I think what leads the conversation is it has to improve the core experience of Overwatch, long term. It can't just be a short term, like, oh, this is nice, and then you're like
16v16 mode, fuck it. Hey, I'm gonna be honest with you.
From the game entirely.
You guys say that as a joke.
Sometimes you see some of those things,
but I can tell you guys aren't TF2 players. 16v16 Gold Rush.
Gather some feedback.
That shit was fucking fun.
Surveys now that
I'd do that shit again
too, and get feedback from them as well. So when you see something like pickable passives, we're not necessarily trying that exact system. We're experimenting with the UI of this. We're experimenting with being able to make a choice in the game and how players actually feel about that. Do they change strategy? But it's not necessarily on the individual ones. Like we've talked about here specific ones and what that may be and how that would look and whether that is good for long-term health. And that's something we've tested recently. So there's a bunch of different things we're trying out, I would say. But at the end of the day, they have to make the core Overwatch experience better. And there's a lot of things about that experience that people love because of how approachable it is and how clean it is. So if we did something like items, it would have to make the game better for hundreds of hours, right?
I'm having a hard time like answering the question without getting into too many specifics.
I actually really love the pickable passive game type. I would prefer that over role passives. Just need one more or two more for each role. I think that's what they're doing with the gameplay hack. I think the gameplay hacked are very small game modes. Sorry, I'm talking over them, but I think those are game modes that they're trying things with, so they can implement it into the real game, the overall game. So they use these pickable passives, see what the community thinks, and if it's a good idea, if it's fun, then they might add it to the actual game, like overall.
Adding additional content to it. So, it's too early to talk about some of those. You'll start seeing some things coming later this year that'll probably, kind of give people hints and point to different systems that can be coming. But big picture is I think we're mostly on the same page here, with a valid maybe not critique, but a valid direction for where to take Overwatch.
Do you have a little crumb you want to drop us, Aaron? A little oh, I really like this concept. It really kind of piques my interest.
No, because I'll just end up. What I'll do is I'll probably do the whole thing and I'll get in trouble. So
you heard me first, and he probably thought I said too much.
Shouldn't they have been tested?
We don't want to get anyone.
Shouldn't they have tested before releasing Overwatch 2?
My very first interview on the Overwatch team, we brought some creators in, and the one thing we weren't going to talk to them about, this is way before the game shipped, was that we were going to have cosmetics in the game. And why is that a thing you're not supposed to talk about? But whatever. And I was answering a question, and I just I don't know why I got to that point, and I just started. I'm just people could see me start to say skins, and I said it, and it took me 10 seconds to say the word. As I'm this runaway train of you're not supposed to say this, and I just did it anyway. So
couldn't help it.
Yeah,
you get excited. I get it.
It must be hard. It must be so hard having so many, a million things, and also keeping track of what you've made public and what you've not made public. I sympathize.
It's hard to even play the game sometimes. I remember before Overwatch 2 shipped, and you're playing Reinhardt, trying to stop your charge because all you're doing at work during the day is playing with Reinhardt that gets to cancel his charge, and it's just sometimes you just can't keep it in your head of what's live, what's coming this season, what's coming the next season, and it's pretty awkward.
I can imagine. Flash, do you have any follow-ups on this section, or should we move on?
I feel like we should move on. I think you should do the first question on the 6v6. I think that's a good one, right? Up to you.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I'm down to. And then I know Flats has quite a few follow-ups on the 6v6, which I'm eager for you guys to answer Flats' questions. So I'll start us off on the 6v6 section, which is just that, do you get where the frustration comes from? Do you get the pain points? Because I think a lot of it especially comes from tanking. But do you get why people are seeking the 6v6 solution? Why they feel we'll never solve the tank solution? Why we need the 2 tank synergy? Why it balances the game out? Why it kind of gives this higher skill ceiling? Do you get where they come from?
Yeah, it's a different experience to some degree, right? I think Aaron mentioned it. The pressure of that experience, the responsibility of that experience, is way heightened in Overwatch 2 compared to Overwatch 1. And that's something that's a lot of tank players may not enjoy. I feel like, especially if you're playing off tank and then you come to Overwatch 2, that's a different experience kind of in itself too. You're playing your hero that used to be able to take a lot more flanks and routes, and now your team's yelling at you maybe in chat, right? So, and if you look at the way we've designed tanks, we've tried to give some of them a little bit ways to let their team feel their presence more too, right? I think when you take the recent wrecking ball change, adaptive shields, it's supposed to be like a little thing wrecking ball can use from time to time that his team can appreciate wrecking ball's presence, right? And he's able to actually maybe help them from time to time too. It's not necessarily the main way wrecking ball is playing, but something there. So I think having a tank on your team leading the charge, a lot of players are kind of looking for that. And if you're playing a different role than that, then it kind of creates a lot of friction. And you get targeted more.
King, sorry.
So we understand that
3 months.
solo tank has a lot more responsibility, a lot more pressure, and we've played variants of 6v6 where that does feel less, right? If you have someone that can cover for you, they can also cover for some of your allies to peel more too. Because I think right now at the moment there are a lot of times where if your team's not coordinated or you're not on comms and maybe they're players that you're not familiar with, it feels like they're asking you to do one thing, but someone's asking you to do something else, and you can't be in two places at once all the time, right? But previously you had someone that could cover for you. I think we get that fundamentally, yeah.
I do want to push really quick back a little.
Let's do it.
I think it's genuinely hit the point where it's unhealthy. Where the average...
Which part in particular?
About how much responsibility is on that role and how much pressure there is on that role, that not even not even just high level players, but the average player legitimately cannot handle how much pressure is put on it between, in your metal ranks, everybody wants a shield.
Tier 1. Ghostface, I get the...
They want peel. They want people to be aggressive. They want you to get kills. They want you to have more damage than the other tank. They want you to have more pressure than the other tank. They want you to be counter-swamping.
I don't know about all that. I don't
You're
want my tank to have the most kills and the most damage.
If they counter swamp you, you need to either counter swap them back or have your team counter swap them, but they might not want to. It has gotten to the point where it's like, not even just balance wise, because like I think a lot of people, myself included, overreacted to the balance patch that came out and thought it was pushing the tank balance way too far, the power meter. But it feels decent, like it feels good. But it's like it's so far over to the side, and it's like I have a feeling we're gonna have to pull it back. That even pushing it that far out, it still feels like you're sometimes 1v5 or
I don't agree with that one, bro. I'm sorry.
Teammates. Not even just saying 6v6 is like the answer, but like that pressure is so immense that I don't even know if it's sustainable.
I don't think
there's a lot of social friction. And that's something we talk about a lot. Are there ways we could just
tanks are way too fucking broken in this game, dude. I'm sorry.
They have a role too in the way the team is composed, right? Like your support players can also switch and they can also do these things. They can also play in different positions, but you're correct, Flats. I do think they expect your teammates expect the tank to do kind of everything a lot of the time. Yeah.
That's because tanks have the ability to do so. Other roles don't have that.
As Flats mentioned, when the patch came out, I saw a lot of the community kind of react strongly to be like, oh my god, they've giga buff tanks. Like, this is going to be awful. I think another consequence of what's happened, I see this shift a lot more in Overwatch 2 than I did in Overwatch 1. It feels like each of the roles are at opposition with each other. Like, it feels like when, the start of Overwatch 2, we had like, oh, supports don't have enough, and we needed to fix supports. Then for a while, it was like, we need to get DPS more stuff, and then it was like, they get the DPS passive. Now we're back to like, well, tanks need more stuff. Like, is it always going to be this way? Are we always going to have like the roles kind of at war with each other? Like, someone is losing, it's like a zero-sum game. Like, someone is losing for someone else to win. Like, does it always have to be this way, or do you guys feel like you do have
supports are dead because of Flats?
That constant friction between.
I'm gonna be completely honest with you. The game making an update on a character is not because of Flats or any of streamers' fault. Streamers don't have say in what is buffed and what is nerfed. That is ridiculous.
Tanks definitely. Well, tanks have
always let's relax here.
Match, throughout Overwatch 2's history, whether that experience felt good or not is subjective opinion, right? But they've always had the most influence on how a match results.
Lies, you nerfed Genji. Trust me, Genji would not be the first character I'd nerf.
Power as well. In that dynamic. So I think, are they pushed a little far? Maybe, yes. And that was
Flats tells his
somewhat
audience what to think, though. That's the people's fault. If I tell you guys what to think, you guys are your own individual. You guys should have your own way of thinking. If I give you guys my opinion and you have a different opinion, that's just what it is. We're different opinions. If I say, hey, fuck Symmetra, Symmetra should not be in the game, and you're like,
but Tanks had the.
But I love Symmetra. Okay, we have a different school. Let's just move on.
There compared to any other.
What are you gonna do? Go to the fucking sim Reddit and go make a post? Good luck, man.
Some of the other roles in terms of like how much damage they were taking for how much they were dying. So we wanted to kind of even that out a little bit, make them more resilient, make them feel like they could actually make plays with, be able to
got it, Jay. You protect him and not notice the wrong things he just said. Didn't I literally just say I disagree with Flats just said about Tanks? Are you fucking stupid? No offense. Oh, of course you are. You followed just now the bitch in my chat. Never mind.
Too far apart. That's when I think when we should probably take a look at bringing them back in a little bit.
Sure thing. Okay. Flats. I'm going to take it over to you on some 6 questions.
Sure. I'm going to combine 2 questions into one to hopefully save some time. In the blog, it seemed like there was some hardware constraints with Overwatch 2 being a bigger game and a heavier game overall. Could the game even
MLS,
switch to handle
48 months, 6v6?
My friend. And if it did switch, is there a rough estimate on how long it would even take to, like, how much work would it take to switch the game from 5v5 to 6v6 if the test decided that this was a better format?
That would take way too long.
Yeah, that's there's maybe like a little bit of context for that, because I think the answer is going to be it depends. Maybe not on the amount of work, but maybe on the amount of time it could take to do something like that. So yeah, there are some performance issues on some older systems with it that we would need to take care of. It's interesting, like when you look at different games and game engines and what they're like sort of like built for, is that like you typically are going to build your engine based off of the game you're running. So like the Overwatch 2 engine is very optimized for a 5v5 game format, and we do allow people to play 6v6 in custom game, but it's not really optimized for that. We've put all of our optimizations into running like the main part of the game. It's kind of similar to where it's like, I don't know exactly what engine, like let's say like Street Fighter uses, but you probably can't just suddenly start running a battle royale, in the Street Fighter engine. It's just not built for that, right? So ours kind of has like some constraints there, and I think that like there'd be work that we would need to do, and the timeline would probably depend on kind of like the results from some of these tests that we were to run. So like, let's say we were to run some 6v6 tests and the community wasn't really that excited for it, or it was a very split thing. We would probably continue to put work into it, but maybe not at the same pace as the version where it's like, hey, we put out a 6v6 test, like everybody's just flocking to that. Like you see like the popularity of it to where it's like, okay, we're going to have to start dropping other initiatives across the team in order to like actually give like, or actually turn the game into the thing that we think is the best version of it and what players are like unanimously asking for, right? So I think in that world, there is sort of like an all hands on deck moment where you're like, oh man, we've really got to do this, like, I think that right now we are like in an investigatory, is that a real word? We are in a period where we are investigating like kind of like the total sum of what that work would be. But so like there's a range, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, where it's something that would be probably several seasons to much longer, depending on, like reaction from the community based off of any of the tests we want.
Is it really that much work, chat?
Yeah, and we look at
besides changing characters
side of it. I think it's, there's definitely a lot of effort in balancing that mode compared to 5v5 and making that shift. But a lot of that is rather than addition.
There's a game mode already in there that's called 6v6. I literally played it not too long ago. Couldn't they literally just take that same patch or whatever,
and
add it to their game, add another slot so it's 6v6 and put it into another game mode?
And
I don't think it would take longer than a few months, no?
Can we kind of redistribute some of that as well? Because we know once you add 2 more players, it's going to get more and more crowded in the game too. So I don't think the effort there is, this giant thing that would take us a very,
bro, the
very
engine
long time.
optimization would need big changes. Chat. I could literally go into a custom game right now, add an extra slot to each team, and just play 6v6 right there.
Yeah. Flash, you want to keep going?
Yeah. I mean, it does sound like, you know, obviously it depends on community reaction, and I highly doubt that everyone will be united on one side. As much as
you guys are saying that you have a good PC chat. When I first started out on Overwatch, I had a fucking like 1070 or 1060 playing on 60 FPS.
I think of casual gamers as the TikTok gamers. That's how I think of them. They don't really like watch YouTube. They don't watch streamers. They don't do anything. They just like get a random TikTok at the beginning of the season that tells them all the changes, and they go, "Oh, what's all the skins?" And that's it. And that's like their Overwatch interaction. But it sounds like it would be a pretty long time. But I guess at that point, like, you know, if it's a couple seasons to sounding like potentially years, or a year or more, if it was even like a hell yeah, like let's go in, would that even be counting heroes that potentially need reworks? Because I couldn't see like Malga working, you know, like or you know, even heroes that I think are great, like Junker Queen, like probably need some tuning or some changes, maybe even. Would that be included in that estimate, or is that a completely different, like, that's just so the game can run, never mind all the hero adjustments that would probably be needed on top of it?
Those are like different parts of the team, and things like that can all kind of like work concurrently if we want them to, you know, like anything that you do on a game team, it's not, you don't have infinite resources. You have like a certain size of the team. So the more hero design resources you potentially put into reworks could theoretically slow down other hero or other hero work that's happening. That's not going to be the big lift here, though. You know, like it really is kind of like looking at some of the performance considerations. I think that's going to be more substantial work than the other sides of it. And they're like, and Alec can talk to this better than I can, but there are a lot of things to look at, you know, like one of the things that we talked about the other day is just like, hey, in the world of 6v6, suddenly does Winston lose his alternate fire? You know, it's like,
no, they don't need to change any of that. They just need to rework numbers.
And it's a lot of fun to use, but there are definitely a lot of things we would need to look at, mostly in the tank role, you know, in that world.
In that world that we're kind of theoretically talking about right now is also accepting queue times, right? Rather than having a plan for how to actually go about trying to make those better too. I think some of the experiments we're going to run are targeted at maybe making those things better, making queue times better. But if we end up, you know, theoretically, if it goes to roll queue 6v6, we kind of know that's a problem already. There needs to be something there that can, you know, help alleviate that over time too.
Is there any
no, they can't emulate Overwatch 1 at the end of it.
Queue times?
The difference between Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2, I think they built a whole new engine
like
for Overwatch 2.
We could talk about. One thing we hear a lot from the community is just like make tanks more fun, you know? And maybe there's a bit of that we can do. I actually think that there's some of that we can do. Like if you look at how far do I roll this back? If you look at the graph, the queue time graph that we showed in the blog, you know, it's a very simple bar graph. The original graph that we were going to show is more of like an over time sort of like line graph, kind of like showing the queue times for different roles over Overwatch history. But we kind of wanted to put out the most simple one we could, just so that like everybody could look at it and understand what we were talking about. But one of the things that you can see is that there was a pretty substantial change in support queue times after Overwatch 2 launched, and like the role was in a worse spot than, you know, like the supports were really getting picked on. I think that there was like a lot of complaints from the community, and we put a lot of effort into supports to where now they're no, like for a little while they were the bottleneck, you know, like right after Overwatch 2 launched, and they're nowhere near that point right now. And so I think that we have a story of us being able to look at a whole role and making it more appealing and more popular to players. So I think we could do some of that for tanks. But I mean, I've listened to some of you talk about this, and I think we're probably all in agreement that I don't think you ever get to make like tank as popular as DPS in like a game, you know? So it's like we could shift it and mitigate it a bit, but that would need to be something that I think we would be looking at in that world. And then I think some of the other things that we would talk about doing is coming up with a less restrictive like way of queuing into the game, you know, like that'd probably be where some of our initial experiments would run. And I get that is something that could happen in 5v5 also. Like this, it is a different topic to where, yes, that you could do something like that in 6v6, you could do something like that in 5v5, but we would look at something like that in 6v6 too. And then there is a question, and like I wouldn't want this to be the answer, but like I think as a team we have to be open to like any sort of reality that makes the game better. Like there is a world where like people want a certain format that they're willing to put up with longer queue times to have it, and that's just the game that they want, you know? So it's like some people might actually
Rhythm,
want that
17 months.
and prefer it.
Tank is never going to be as
like
fun as Tracer.
We are like kind of like open to a lot of different
if they design a character like Tracer, then put it in the tank role, probably. Like, I mean, look at Venom. Venom is pretty interesting to see in Marvel Rivals.
Run two different formats of Overwatch.
He's like a dive character and whatnot.
I think that like it's easy to say like that we think that there's a lot of work there. There's a lot of pitfalls there, but if you have like players like seriously asking for things, and there's like you can see the game, let's say, growing at a faster rate, or a bunch of people jumping in and really responding to something, why wouldn't you want to shift the way you run your game in order for like players to enjoy it more, and two, for you to be more successful, for the game to be more successful, you know? Like, so I think that there's a lot of openings there, and maybe I didn't, now that I'm thinking about my answer, I don't know if I totally answered your question there.
No, you're fine.
So, like, okay.
It's all good information.
There's a few things on the tank one in particular. We actually saw with the mid-season patch, players, like, we want to look at this long term though, but players are not queuing for tank more, and they're queuing for damage and tank more than they were previously. And we have seen queue time gains with that patch, and has sustained itself too. And it's not the percentage, you know, I think that we talk about being like the holy grail, but I think that's a recent example of something, okay, the experience has been powered up a little bit, or brought up a little bit, and here are the results of that too. So
no, there's no way Overwatch is going to do a Marvel collab
cadence strategy.
There's no way.
End up in a different format, right? In terms of, there needs to be more options and more types of play experiences for tank players in particular, if that is the case long term.
SVB, I want to rip it. I don't want to take away any of your time. I want to rip it. Aaron, you kind of led me into it. I have to ask you this question. Have you ever considered 7v7? And if so, could it even be feasibly done?
So not that seriously. A lot of our we did some really early play tests in Overwatch development of 7v7. And it's funny, like I did say earlier that, you know, like the right decisions could change over time. So like, hey, maybe that's something you revisit, right? But at the time, a lot of the feedback that we would get from those play tests is it just felt like you were being attacked from everywhere at the same time. You know, there's just like enough players in the match that it happened. And I think that what can happen sometimes is
I would not play this game if it was a 7v7.
Like the difference between having one too many things to track and 10 too many things to track can almost feel the same to a lot of players, you know? Like you're just overloaded, you know?
I think it's either 6v6 or a 5v5, chat.
A lot of our,
I don't know why we're going off track here.
You do is like, you might close like one window or one door.
Listen, for Overwatch, TF2 had Highlander, which is 99, 6v6s, which is 6v6, and then random lobbies that you could join that could be fucking 16 versus 16.
in the early 7v7.
That's why I said 16 versus 16 was fun. Gold Rush, download TF2, play on a Gold Rush server that has a 32 slots, and go 16 versus 16.
Probably get some feedback like that.
Or Dust Bowl. Dust Bowl was a fun game too.
I'm also not sure if it's like the solution to the queue time issue. I think it would help it. You know, like, and I'm assuming in that 7v7, you're talking about like the 2-3-2, you know. But man, you have way less tanks queuing than support, you know, right now. So you're still going to have like an imbalance in the ratios between roles. And so like, I think like mathematically it'd probably help a little bit. But I don't think that it would be the thing that suddenly gets us back to like really fast queue times with 2 tanks in there. Maybe, you know, like maybe I like kind of like talk about this here also, because like one of the things that that 5v5 does is it really helped with queue times, right? And we didn't talk about that much, if at all, when we made the swap, right, to Overwatch 2, and we did this. And it was internally we discussed queue times as a big problem, you know, like in Overwatch, you know, it was something we really wanted to fix. Like, people aren't going to
3-minute queues are not bad
to wait that long, right? It's just
queues are now 3 minutes long anyway. 3-minute queues are fast, in my opinion.
But one of the things that we were
I think medium queues would probably be around like 7 to 12 minutes,
Overwatch
and the long queues are just probably longer than 12 minutes.
Was to play DPS, because every time we did something to like shorten the queue, like whether it was like the priority pass system or any of the other things we do, as queue times would go down, you just see other people going and play DPS. Like there was always like this like sort of like undiscovered set of demand. And so like we weren't sure when we did this whether like if queue times suddenly went down, if you would just get a ton more people queuing for DPS and for it to not actually affect queue times. Thankfully that like wasn't the case, you know. Shoot, and I don't even know how I got onto that tangent, so I'm just gonna like
blinded Lilith pre-draws have 3 months
on that answer, and we can move on.
Well, you were talking about 2-3-2. I think that's why you were saying, because you were saying, well,
there you go.
77, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, we're still gonna need more tank players. I mean,
do you want 77 flats? I know you've talked about it. I just didn't know how serious you were as you've been talking about it.
I mean, it's not the big thing was like the 2 tanks, right? Like people want 2 tanks, they want to have the synergy, they miss the synergy.
The one thing I don't understand about
so it's like you can't blame
flats,
right? Like you can't just be like it's.
I wouldn't ask Flats what he thinks the game should have. He logs on, spends 4 hours in the practice range, and then does quick play.
Typically tank players. That is the majority of people.
I'm not trying to flame him or anything, but that's what he does.
That would give them what they want. Queue times is a big bottleneck on the DPS role, and people want to play DPS in every game. It's always the most played. So like by giving it an extra role, my idea was like when we went from 6v6 to 5v5, a lot of people believed that the game would be too open, like it would feel empty, it wouldn't feel like as full as it did before, but it didn't. It actually felt okay. My thought process is if I felt that way before, because the game's also evolved, right? Like the game's changed a lot over the years. And if the game didn't feel empty for 5v5, would it feel too chaotic with 7v7? It gives them the synergy, it cuts down on the queue times, it lets everyone still be able to play their game at extra DPS, allows people to queue more, but also people enjoy the role. That's a good thing. People want to play those characters. I think that's a really great
chat,
thing to
we are going completely off topic in my opinion. It's either 5v5 or 6v6, and now we're throwing in a fucking 7v7 out of nowhere.
Probably can't handle
this is wild, bro. If we're talking about 7v7, fuck it, just make it 10v10 at this point.
We'd have to do work, you know, for 6v6. 7v7 would probably be harder, you know. I can't promise that it would be harder. Like I haven't like actually talked to our engineers about it. Sometimes things that you think ought to be easy are hard, and sometimes things that you think ought to be hard are kind of like easy. And so like there can be surprises. So I guess I don't have like a great answer for you there. It is interesting though when you talk about like, you know, like, hey, maybe that would bring queue times down. I don't think it would bring them down as much, but like there are like a bunch of in-between versions of what we're talking about where it's like, well, what if queue times were only like 20% worse, you know? And what if some of the social problems we're only 10 or 20% worse, and you kind of come up with this other format where it's like, oh hey, we've kind of like solved a lot of the problems, and like kept a little bit of the old ones, but not as much as we used to have, like in the world of OpenQ, or the world, even worse, the world of like No Limits or something like that. There's maybe like some versions of the game in there that actually work for everybody, but it's like kind of hard to talk about what those would be, but like I'm open to it.
I think I'd like to come in at this point, actually, because I think that this is something you've kind of alluded to, like you've alluded to around it, I feel, a few times in this call, Aaron. And it, like Flats, I was wondering if I'd have to pitch my idea to you, but I think that like you've kind of already shown like a propensity, just the way you're talking. I feel like you guys have already explored a lot of this, which is just what I want to talk about is the hybrid OpenQ.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned it in the blog where you're like, we're actually looking at a hybrid OpenQ system. I think for all the people who are 6v6 enjoyers, there's also a section of people who are OpenQ enjoyers, right? And maybe they don't get, they're not quite so loud because it arguably is an OpenQ already, but that's really difficult because it's not really a seriously balanced mode. It's not really given much attention. But there is a charm to the OpenQ there. It helps with queue times. It is a better way potentially to, like, for some people to enjoy. What is your, where are you at basically? Because you kind of alluded to your experimenting with it. So what are the ideas you have, and where are you at in terms of exploring a hybrid or open QE system for Overwatch 2?
Yeah, I can touch on this one a little bit. I think one of the things we're looking at with our experiments, there are important elements to any format we implement long term, right? We need to be able to make games swiftly, make sure those games are quality. We need to make sure that long term we think they're healthy and can be balanced too. I think we're gonna try some max 2 variants for sure. I think there's an element there of even in the 5v5 format, are there hybrids? I think there's like the first question everyone has is like 5v5 6v6. I think like our job as designers is to be like, actually there's like C, D, E, F, G, like we can keep going, right? Bunch of different options we can at least look at and try to learn from. So I think I actually saw your video many months ago about that max 2. So I think we're gonna like experiment with some sort of format there, but I think there's some questions of, do we want to try another format where that solo player actually gets a bonus of some sort? If you are that, say you're the solo tank and you're playing 1-2-2 again, but it's actually open queue format and you're playing against 2 tanks, it's gonna be rather difficult. Do we need to give you something? Or you're the solo support on a 2-2-1 team and you have to do all that healing. Do you need something too? I think there's a question there, something we might experiment with too. So that in particular, leads to a lot of other problems. I think fun, not necessarily fun ones, but fun ones to think about. Whereas like, how do we do the rating in that? Like, how many people are actually flex? Are certain people locked into the roles of the game? Like maybe 3 of them are. So you always have to have a tank to support a DPS at least, right? You have that at a minimum, and then 2 flex people come in, and so I think there's some matchmaking concerns there. But there's better we want to try there, and for
the game's sake, if these experiments role queue was a thing,
right?
I don't know if open queue, like there's a lot of problems with open queue.
Yeah, and,
that just don't make any sense.
And it's
the same thing with Marvel Rivals. I think Marvel Rivals right now is open queue, but they're thinking about adding a role queue because it needs a fucking role queue
in 6v6. But like, there are, even in the world of 5v5, tests like that I think could be very interesting. Like we've talked about like what it was like, before role queue was implemented in the game, right? You'll get into a match with like 5 DPS or something like that. That was just the start of the match. Typically by the time you got halfway through that match, like most of the time, not every time, you kind of had a comp, like people are just swapping and they're trying to make answers. And so like,
no, you don't need role queue. You need to nerf the fucking tanks, dude. Nerfing the tanks and not having open queue or role queue is still going to be the same fucking shit, bro.
Right? Yes, we do have a community there. It's actually our third, like,
if you nerf the tank so much and you're playing open queue, no one's going to fucking play tank. Everyone's just going to play 4 DPS, 5 DPS, 6 DPS. Because you nerf the tank so much, no one wants to play a fucking tank.
Open queue, right? There's still a decent amount of people playing that mode. That being said, I don't think we want it to be the main mode, but that flexibility of being like, hey, can our DPS just swap the tank even if it's just for a little
That's
bit?
Who I'm arguing with.
Like we just want to do a particular thing without going all the way into that world of like well, let's just have,
And that is cut off for me.
5 DPS or whatever. I think that there could be something there that would be fun. The 6v6 side of it becomes more complicated. And also, like, there's a lot of versions of this where
you can lead a horse to water,
like
chat, but you can't force it to drink.
A particular role. Like, there's ways you can implement this. Like, it's funny, the way that we play test internally is something we just call role limits. It all means is it's open queue. Everyone goes into one of our play tests, and once you get 2 people to select DPS is just locked out, right? And so, like, there's versions of this that we could implement that could be like that, but suddenly it still means, like, if you were to do this and put this into comp, your tank player might not actually be a tank player on your team as you get into that. It does get into some of what we were talking about earlier, which is like, yeah, but is that good enough? You know? There's a drawback there.
I don't know.
You're gonna feel
I don't know
like
how I feel about this, chat.
But is it worth it in order to have a system where you don't have really long queue times? And
Callow,
you're still able
13 months.
to have a different format of the game.
I know they're doing this to give us more visibility on what they're trying to do with the game, and they're trying to be more open. But I feel like
this blog piece was like an introduction.
I didn't learn anything that I already knew. If they did implement 6v6 in the game, would it take some time? Yes, obviously they have to do coding and all this shit and balancing for the 6v6 game mode.
You know, it's like whether
but like.
A 2,
and then we talked about 7v7, which I think is totally irrelevant. No one cares about 7v7. I don't even know where that came from.
Limit that we end up doing for a 6v6 playtest. It'd be nice to start working through some of that. I think we have a few that we want to run, and we'll probably be doing it in season 13. But
I have to rewatch this. I don't know.
Yeah, like, let us know.
I mean, that sounds super interesting. Flats, I have a follow-up on that one, but do you want to interject anything?
I took way too much time. You got the rest of this, all you.
No, thank you. No, I don't even know if I'm allowed to ask this actually, but so if you want to decline, feel free to say no. But I love to hear that you're experimenting. I think 10% actually sounds like a really surprisingly high number. You're telling me that 10% of player hours are in open queue. I'm like, wow, I would have never guessed that.
It might be more like 9, and it always kind of goes
9% of players.
Yeah, sure. It's pretty high.
Of the time is in open queue,
because that's a mode that nobody really pays attention to. But
that's true. I think open queue. Listen, 9% too low for me, chat. Cut it out.
Overwatch.
Cut it out.
Clones, we might say generously competitors that have been kind of coming around recently. Do you look at them and kind of get lessons from them, like relearn some lessons? Because they're kind of, a lot of them, one that rhymes with Arvel Kivels, that is kind of going through a lot of the same decisions that earlier Watch went through. Does having them experiment for you in some way, does that kind of give you lessons?
It could. We're always looking at other games. You like how I just turned this into like a generic answer?
That's totally fine. I don't expect you to be always necessarily be able to answer this.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about a specific game, but yeah, well, we look at other games and we try to learn from other games, and like, it'll be interesting to see how some of these other games, whether they change over time also, like, I think there is like a pretty decent part of the gaming community, especially when you talk about the free-to-play community, that kind of jumps from game to game, and so the ones that don't, they kind of become like your core audience, and your core audience will start, like, they're going to have opinions on the way the game ought to go, and they're going to play it a certain way. And it's like, in a competitive game, they could start finding issues in the game. And like, every dev team, worth their salt is going to have to examine the issues that come up in that game and see what they do to solve them. So
what other games can you learn from but Marvel and Paladins?
Like
Concord? I mean, there's also that new one that Steam's coming out with, apparently. What is it called, chat? Do you guys know?
It?
Yeah, I mean, it just came to my mind, so I apologize for kind of like just throwing it out there.
Deadlock. I feel like Overwatch is going to have a lot of competition, and I feel like they should look at these games with and better their game. I feel like Overwatch has been sitting at the top for so long that had no competition other than Paladins. But who the fuck plays Paladins?
No one's going to want to watch that.
They could fuck up several times, and we could complain. But what game are we really going to go to?
Well, yeah, I don't want to put you in an awkward position either. So
I feel like now that these games are coming out, now there's competition. Like Marvel Rivals chat was a lot of fun. I think the only problem with Marvel Rivals is that they need to go to a roll queue. They need to get better mic.
What makes your game
whatever they use for voice comms, they should get something that's better. And then also the key drops, the drops that they did for that game were absolutely fucking shit. If they fix that, I'm pretty sure a lot more people would be playing and watching that game.
Hopefully, like that's clear to people too. But I think that competition's great. I think it just makes you focus even more and makes it clear to players and yourselves.
Oh, and better optimization for the servers. Yeah, like take out all the small shit that who cares if it breaks or flies away or whatever.
That's my answer also to that question.
Okay. So scratch that back. We'll edit this in post. When this goes on YouTube, we'll just take straight up Alec's answer. I think it's a really I think it's a really good way of putting it. I actually want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which is that, talking about like, hey, we're listening to you guys. Like you kind of brought up the 6v6 thing. So we listen to you guys. I kind of have two joint questions. One is like, well, how does the community get ideas to you? Because if I can be frank, you guys won't be able to necessarily say this, but like the 6v6 conversation was very loud for very long. It was like a lot of noise for a long time. And then we get this blog. I'm pretty sure we don't necessarily want that every time. We don't want huge divisive discussions every time before something gets thought about or talked about or addressed. So well, how does the community get ideas to, like, when there's a section of the community who are like, we really believe in this, how does that happen? And B, how much are you willing to kind of let the community do their experimentations and maybe empower them to do their experimentations? Because, with 6v6, there's like a code that people are playing in the workshop. I'm sure the workshop community would love more powers to be able to kind of run more tests and play. So those are my kind of joint questions. Like, how do you see the community's role in all of this?
It's pretty huge. So there's a bit of a history to this conversation, and actually, like, looking at it now and looking at the response of to the blog piece, we'll see what it is to this discussion, right? I kind of wish maybe we had talked about it a little bit sooner. There is a funny story here, like I wrote a different blog piece last December.
I think this is ending, chat. This is ending within like a minute or two.
And I'm like, hey, I think it's time for us to like talk to the community about 6v6 because it has been consistent, but there's been up and down to it.
Did I say anything about hero bans? No, but we talked about 7v7.
Talks about the most. Sometimes the community is talking about other aspects of the game, and so like with this one, like it was basically we were gonna like throw this blog piece over the wall and then we were all gonna go on like vacation for the holidays, and so we didn't really feel that comfortable about it. And then at the same time, at least back then, because we hadn't looked into some of the considerations of what
33 versus 33, one of every hero and every game, right? I don't think there's 33 characters. I think there's 40 now. Even with I think
imagine you
Juno coming
run 6v6 tests and everybody loves it, and then you're like, cool, we're not doing anything with that, because we can't, right? And so like I think for us, we wanted to do enough work to where like before we actually talked to the community about it,
I think there's 40 characters.
We would know that it's like, hey, if we were actually going to like look into this seriously, we would need to know that we would be able to actually deliver on something for our players. So some of that delay was us kind of like doing a little bit more due diligence.
Okay, chat, I have to do something else. I think this is the end,
in order to avoid kind of like shooting ourselves in the foot here. And then I think that like, and it would be cool to hear from you guys. I know we're running out of time here, but like to me,
no, we're not doing rivals. We're doing something else real quick.
Is unique and it's different from a lot of the other ones that have come up.
Okay. Yeah, to be honest with you, my opinion about this whole thing, chat, I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys. They need, what I would do is, I'm sorry, but OpenQ 9%, take out OpenQ, take out arcade. If you really wanted to play arcade, jump in the custom games, make your own arcade. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Bro, bring in the 6v6, make it so there's not that many queues that people do. Try to bring the queues together so you don't spread out the community, bro. And so there's not that like everyone's queuing other shit. See how much 6v6 brings into this game. If it's very popular and not just because of the hype, keep it there for a while. See if people play it, not because of just the hype. If it is popular, then they bring into the conversation, hey chat, hey guys, are we doing 6v6 or 5v5? And then after that, you have to pick 5v5 or 6v6 because you can't have both. Okay, friends, YouTube thinks you might like this next video, so let me know if they're right.